In this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 stages of fasting and basically what happens physiologically in your body during these stages. So fasting can be broken down into 5 stages. Now, basically these 5 stages are kind of determined by or divided into basically how the body uses glucose for energy. So the body has 2 main sources of energy. So it can either use glucose or it can use fat. And most of the body and most of our cells can use either one of these sources of energy, with the exception of the brain, which cannot use fats directly. But basically, most of the body can use either one of these energy sources, and they can kind of flip between these energy sources regularly. So they don't have to stick to one. Now, the body uses... or the body can store energy in kind of multiple different ways. So it can store it as glucose or it can store it as fat. Now, glucose is stored mostly in the liver in the form of glycogen, which is basically long chains of glucose stuck together. And so when the body needs energy, what it's going to do is it's going to break down the glycogen into those individual glucose molecules and basically send it out into the bloodstream. Now, when the glycogen levels in the liver become low, the body is going to rely on your fat stores and breaking down the fat cells, basically which are called adipocytes. Now, the fatty acids from these fats, from these triglycerides, are going to travel to the liver, and the liver is going to break them down into ketones, and the body is going to basically run off ketones, fats and ketones. So when these fats are sent to the liver and they're broken down into fatty acids and glycerols, or a glycerol. Each triglyceride is broken down into 3 fatty acids and a glycerol. The body will burn the fatty acids for energy, and then it will use the glycerols to actually convert into glucose. Because remember, some cells can only rely on glucose, so they have to have glucose for energy. And when we're basically relying on only fat for energy, the brain can't use that, so it has to be, the certain cells in the body can only use glucose, so the liver has to still be providing glucose, even if there's no glucose coming in from food and or in other sources. So the 5 stages of fasting. Stage 1 is referred to as the feeding stage. So this stage lasts from 0 hours to 4 hours after your last meal. So at this time, there's going to be a lot of glucose in your system because, you've been eating proteins, carbs, and fats. So there's glucose present from your food, and your cells are basically going to rely on that glucose preferentially as their main energy. Now, there are 2 main nutrient sensors in the body. One's called insulin, and the other one is called mTOR. So when the body senses carbohydrates and proteins, these sensors are going to go up. So they're going to elevate and upregulate. And what these are actually going to do is they're actually going to help to store the energy that you've consumed and put it away for later when you don't have fuel. So the body will store the glucose in the liver as glycogen, like we talked about, and then it's going to store the fat away in the fat cells for later use. Now, stage 2 of fasting is what's referred to as the post-absorptive stage. So this stage lasts for anywhere from the 4-hour mark to the 16-hour mark after the meal. So during this time, the nutrient sensors, insulin and mTOR, as mentioned above, they start to drop at this time, and the body is getting energy now from the glycogen in the liver and not as much from basically the food that you consumed. So remember we talked about how the liver is going to start to break down glycogen and to supply the body with energy. So once we've kind of used up some of the energy from the food, the body is now going to rely on glycogen to fuel yourself, because this is between the 4 and the 16-hour mark and you're not consuming any food. So the body's got to get some energy from somewhere. So the liver can actually store up to about 20 to 24 hours of kind of glucose or energy when there's no food coming in. So There is a little bit of a caveat to this, because if you're on a ketogenic diet or a very low carbohydrate diet, your liver actually isn't storing glycogen because you're not consuming any carbohydrates. So the body basically just primarily runs off fats and ketones in that case. But generally, if someone is consuming carbohydrates, their glycogen stores will be full, which is about 100 grams of glycogen, and that can last you up to about 20 to 24 hours of energy. So this stage is really key, because during this time, you're actually allowing the insulin hormone to start to drop. So allowing insulin levels to come down will actually really benefit certain health conditions that are influenced by high insulin levels, such as heart disease, high blood pressure, which is called hypertension, diabetes, obesity, PCOS, gout, among others. So, and also during this stage, you will release water that's been retained and salt, as the kidneys will excrete excess water and salt when insulin is low. Also during this stage, as insulin is dropping, the counter-regulatory hormones, as they're collectively called, as they counter insulin's actions, they'll start to go up. So these sorts of hormones are like cortisol, you might have heard that one. Your sympathetic tone will go up. Norepinephrine, also referred to as noradrenaline, and growth hormone. So these will start to upregulate as insulin starts to go down. So these hormones will tell the body to get energy from its storage sites, such as the liver in regards to glycogen, and the body fat to be burned. Now, stage 3 of fasting is referred to as gluconeogenesis. And this stage lasts from 16 to 30 hours after the meal. So this stage, the glycogen, or also the stored glucose in the liver, is running out, and we haven't completely switched over to burning fat quite yet. So there's this kind of like intermediate sort of stage where the body is going to generate glucose from protein and glycerol from fat. Okay, so the body is generating this glucose, and it's called gluconeogenesis. That's what it basically means. It's a creation of new glucose, and it's coming from proteins, and it's coming from glycerol, which is part of the breakdown of the fat. So even though you're breaking down protein in this stage, which sounds bad, your body's actually going through what's called autophagy. So where it's basically breaking down old and damaged cells and organelles, which are components of cells, and they're basically that aren't working properly, and it basically recycles them and reuses them. So autophagy was actually, there's a researcher in Japan that actually did a lot of research on autophagy and actually got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016. And he actually refers to this process in the body as intracellular recycling system. So it's basically within the cell, the body is going to be recycling and using up old damaged parts to basically use those, the constituents of those damaged parts, so the amino acids, it's going to use those to build up other tissues in the body that it needs. So it's an amazing rejuvenation process, and it's something that you do want to happen. Now the body will decide on what's necessary and what is, not necessary. So as a bonus for someone that's, doing fasting, intermittent fasting for weight loss purposes, this stage of autophagy will actually help to reabsorb the excess skin and connective tissue. So I've had some clients worried about, when I lose the weight, am I going to have a lot of saggy skin, a lot of excess skin? By implementing fasting and doing fasting to at least a point where, we're doing, in this case, we're getting to stage 3, where we're at that 16 to 30 hour mark, the body will start to reabsorb those proteins. So skin is a protein, connective tissue is a protein. So it'll start to reabsorb that and use that for other structures. Now, the main regulator for autophagy, for this kind of cellular recycling, is that mTOR, what I mentioned before, so that nutrient sensor. Now, so the more mTOR you have, the less autophagy. And since mTOR is triggered with carbs and protein, so basically with food, the cleaner your fast is, so in the sense of, not ingesting things like bone broth, which is going to have some amino acids in it, but sticking to just water, black coffee, and tea, the less likely mTOR will be stimulated. So if you really want to elicit the benefits of fasting in regards to weight loss, health benefits, the skin, reabsorbing the skin, all that kind of stuff I was talking about. You really want to minimize any calories coming in, particularly from carbs and protein, because that's going to stimulate mTOR. So it's basically going to shut off that switch for autophagy. Stage 4 is what's referred to as ketosis. This stage lasts from day 2 to about 1 week after the last meal. And at this point, the brain isn't able to rely primarily on glucose for energy, as there isn't enough glucose for energy because basically you've almost used up all your glycogen, so your stored glucose. So the liver now basically takes fats and turns those into ketones, like I was mentioning before. And those actually, it's amazing thing about ketones is they can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and fuel the brain. So remember I was mentioning in the very beginning that the brain cannot directly use fats. It's because the fats in their whole form as a triglyceride, they can't actually cross into the brain to be used. So they have to be broken down into their individual parts, converted to ketones, and then the brain can use it. And this can actually supply up to 70% of the energy that the brain uses, which is fairly phenomenal. And the last stage is called protein conservation. This stage lasts for about 1 week and beyond after your last meal. So this is where you're supplying your body with energy almost exclusively from stored body fat. Protein is being broken down still to produce glucose, because remember there's certain cells in your body that can only use glucose, so they can't use fats and they can't use ketones. But primarily the body is being supplied with energy through fats and ketones. So this stage, really interesting thing about this stage is that hunger is really subsided in this stage because certain hormones, certain hunger hormones specifically called ghrelin, are really just downregulated. So that's why you may have heard of people that have fasted for 30 days, 40 days, longer. You might be wondering, like, how could they even survive that? Like, must be just so hungry. But the interesting thing is the body will actually down-regulate and slow down certain hormones that encourage hunger. So you get to a certain point where you can just basically keep going on and just basically your body is now feeding off of itself, feeding off of its fat stores. So there you have it. I hope that was helpful. Please comment below with, your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And that creates discussion, that creates all that good stuff. So comment below, let me know what you think. I really appreciate you watching this. If you haven't already, please click that thumbs up button if you liked it, and click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can receive notifications of all videos. And if you have any ideas for future videos that you'd like me to do, anything that you'd want to learn, please just comment below as well on that, and I'd love to do them. So keep it locked in here on my channel, and I look forward to coming to you in the next video. Happy fat loss.